benchmarking? Benchmarks. Part of it, yeah, so it does involve goals, but not exactly. It's a little bit different. Any other thoughts? And if anybody online, welcome, has something to add, just drop into the chat or unmute yourself. Other thoughts?
You're starting.
Okay, so so you're gonna have a starting point. And then maybe your goal or just your next point. So has anyone ever actually done this with any aspect of fitness? Everything else in life, yeah, Danny.
Starting, like setting.
Okay.
A starting point will be none, and then finally able to maybe do a procedure by yourself. Maybe.
Okay, yeah, so learning the different steps of a procedure. That's a little bit different though, because it's more like learning a skill. So this is good because I think it's like important to understand these are all components of fitness as well. So we do skill work to learn a new skill that has different components that we need to put together, similar to learning a procedure. Seth, what were you gonna say?
Done my training programs, like for rowing. I always started off, got a benchmark at the start of the season. From that, we have a goal of what do we want our time to be? What do we want our fitness level to be? Like, what is the end goal?
Okay, so maybe like, would you do like a 1,000-meter row?
Or 2,000. Yeah.
Okay, like, do you remember maybe one season? Like, what was your starting point?
640.
Okay, and then did you sort of have something in mind in terms of where you wanted to get to?
Sub 630.
Sub 630. Okay, so then the goal was sub 630. And you probably did a bunch of work in between, yeah, to get to that goal. So I think that's a good example. It's still not quite exactly what benchmarking is. So there's one other component of benchmarking that we're missing. What? A reference point. Yeah, great, excellent. So why is that important?
Between the goal and the start?
So yeah, so the reference point could be internal to you, but the reference point could also be external. So the reference point could be something that's like a standard. So you have a standard, and then you measure your baseline, and then you determine what is your goal, maybe also relative to the reference point. Yeah, so a lab value is going to have a reference point, but it's a little bit different with fitness benchmarking because it's not going to be like variable from moment to moment or hour to hour. It's more so like a progressive over time. But I think one good example that we could talk about is related to, we'll talk about a few different components, but one is like a strength measure. Okay, so if you look into the world of exercise physiology, there's some lifts that everybody would look at in terms of strength training, and then there's benchmarks as to what is considered like a fitness goal. Like if you could do this level, this amount of weight at this age, you probably could focus your energy on other parts of your fitness instead of continuing to focus on that particular aspect. So I think our next seminar will talk a little bit more about what are the components of fitness, but for today I'm just going to introduce, and they're over there on the pyramid as well. So we have cardio, metabolic, conditioning, running, rowing, swimming. These are all good examples of ways to train this part of your fitness. And then we have gymnastics. So these are generally body weight movements like squats, without weight. And then we have strength. So this is moving implements, whether it's a dumbbell, barbell, kettlebell, strength training, using the external implement to train your muscles. So one good benchmark that we use in the world of strength training is like, there's three kind of main components to it that people work on. So one is bench press. Another is back squat. And a third is deadlift. And Dinesh, why don't you talk a little bit about like what are some standards that people can use in terms of, okay, work towards a bench press that is this number.
I think it's 0.75.
Yeah.
Weight for bench press.
Yes.
1.0 for back squat, and then 1.5 for
Oh,
deadlift.
okay. Yeah. So let me just repeat what he said since he doesn't have the So it's 575 times body weight and 1.5 times your body weight. These would be considered pretty good markers of fitness within this domain. This is a benchmark. So let's say you have somebody who weighs 200 pounds. Okay, so for that 200-pound person, their bench press is we want to work towards a bench press of 150 pounds and a back squat of 200 pounds and a deadlift of 300 pounds. So then we could do an assessment. We could test this. So we bring the person into the gym and we, give them a warm up and then see how much is their heaviest bench press that they could do. So let's say somebody like one of our patients that comes in and they haven't ever done any weightlifting, and the most that they can do comfortably without a risk of injury is 55 pounds. So then we go back to our original framework. It's like, okay, if they can only do a 55-pound bench press, then we can do quite a bit of work with them to improve their strength and try to work towards this benchmark of 150. Are we going to set a goal of 150 starting from 55? No. Right, it wouldn't be practical. So we're going to pick something more realistic, like maybe 65 pounds. So let's work from 55 to 65 pounds over the next 2 months, and then let's reassess it and see where we are. Let's say we have another athlete who comes into the gym. This person has done a lot of weight training, but they've never really done a lot of running or cardio. So we're going to put them through the same strength assessment, but we also want to time their 1 mile run. I think a reasonable mile time for an adult who is fairly well conditioned, let's say in their 40s or 50s, would be around 9 minutes. I'm just making this up. There's actually standards out there, but I'm just giving an example. Okay, so let's say we test this person who's done a bunch of weightlifting, and they're able to bench 165, 200-pound person. They're able to squat 250, and they can deadlift 375. But when you put them in the mile run, it takes 11 minutes and 25 seconds. So how could this physically be useful in terms of improving this person's fitness? How would you want to spend time with this person to improve their fitness?
You will have to be more on the metabolic part.
Exactly.
The conditioning part.
Exactly. So probably this person doesn't need a whole lot more work when it comes to strength. They've met some basic standards when it comes to fitness. Now, we're not talking about competition or those types of things. We're talking about overall health and fitness. So their time is going to be better spent maybe improving their cardiorespiratory capacity and reducing their mile time. So maybe they would set a goal of like 11 minutes and then 10.5 minutes and slowly try to improve getting closer to 9 minutes. So the reason we talk about this is because when we bring people into our program, we first do an assessment and we assess different components of their fitness. We assess strength, mobility, cardiorespiratory capacity, balance, and then we can make a plan to see how our fitness capacity, then we want to work on body weight movements, then we want to start worrying about strength, because you need to have like a baseline of cardiometabolic conditioning for your metabolic health. Questions? Yeah, so I mean, I think if any of you guys are interested, we could do a day. I've actually talked to Dr. Raju about this. I would love to do a day where we do like basically a testing day. And we could do all the components, right? So like maybe we do it September 1st and we pick different measures for each component, and then we wait 6 months and retest. And if you're following a general fitness program, which is what CrossFit is, you should see improvement in some of the domains over a 6-month period. And then that can help you know like where to focus your energy over the next 6 months and so on. So that you're constantly improving in one aspect of your fitness or another and not overdoing any other aspects. Are there any questions online or any comments from anyone who's online? Okay. Did you want to add anything? You're going to come use the mic. Yeah, because people are online.
So I was just thinking about Seth's comment about like how do you improve your metabolic conditioning. So let me ask, if you have someone who has 11:25 mile, what would be some things that they could do to move towards closer to 9?
The question is, what are some things that you could do to improve the amount of time it takes you to run a certain distance? Like, so your mile time, reduce it from 11:25 closer to maybe 11 minutes. How would you maybe run? But like sometimes, like I think it might be intuitive to think, oh, just run a mile every day and you'll keep getting faster, and you might. But also you can improve in other ways that can be more effective and maybe also make you less prone to injury or overdoing it, which is doing like intervals. So instead of running a mile, you practice maybe your 400 meters, which is a quarter mile. So if your mile time is 11:25, your 400 meters should be somewhere around 3 minutes something, maybe a little less. Actually, closer to a little under 3 minutes. You could set, for example, 3 minutes of running and 2 minutes of rest. And you try to run that quarter mile as fast as possible to try to reduce the amount of time it takes you for each quarter mile to 2.5 minutes. Maybe 2 minutes, 45 seconds instead of closer to 3 minutes. So over time, improving each of those intervals, then when you run the full mile, you'll likely be faster. So these are different training methodologies. And you'll see a lot of interval training in CrossFit, for example, as a way to improve your overall capacity. And that's why I always say, like, you can get more sometimes out of doing 2 to 3 minutes at speed and capacity than like 30 minutes at a slower pace in terms of improving your fitness. Any other thoughts or questions? Yes, Seth.
So with that, what's the general take on heart rate training rather than like heart rate zonage rather than like using time as a basis?
I mean, I think it depends on what your goals are. You know, like, so what would be your goal if you were gonna do?
Just generally using heart rate as in like staying in this heart rate zone for this amount of time, because that's what like my watch Garmin tracks is.
Yeah.
So like I could do a like 2-hour bike ride in zone 2 at like 130 heart rate, or I could do a 30-minute like HIIT session.
Yeah.
And be up at like 170, 180.
Yeah.
And I would get more benefit from the more intensive heart rates.
I don't think that I would say there's more benefit. I think there's different benefits. So like I still recommend a baseline of cardiometabolic conditioning to everyone. So even if, for example, you're training CrossFit 3 times a week, I think it's important to do zone 2 for at least 150 minutes a week. You'll get some of that in your warm-ups and cool downs and things like that with a CrossFit type workout. But I think doing that, you're never going to have a downside of doing that a little bit of additional to work. it also just kind of reduces general sedentary lifestyle. I will say, just since you brought up wearables and devices, I'm not a huge fan of wearables and devices for the average person, because I think it's much more important to be focused on how did you feel, what I call rate of perceived exertion, like did it feel hard or did it feel easy? Definitely to get into zone 2, we need to get our heart rate to a certain range. You know, you don't want it to be like, you're not really doing zone 2 if your heart rate's in the 90s. But yeah, it should feel like moderately difficult. Like I think being able to hold a conversation while you're doing the exercise is a good gauge to know that you're in zone 2. So I don't think like there's really any too much upper limit on something like biking that you could still do in addition to the high intensity. But the high intensity definitely brings in the components of like physiologic remodeling, hormonal triggers, and other things that bring benefits that are different from what you get from zone 2, which is just building that engine like at a baseline. Other thoughts or questions?
So, person who is like in 50s,
Yeah.
who never did all these.
Yeah.
Still possible to.
Yeah, I mean, I started in my late 30s. And that's why I think it's great to get benchmark. It's great to have a benchmark and know your baseline. So for example, if we pick like just simple components would be like, it doesn't have to be a mile. How long does it take you to run half a mile or walk? However long it is, you just measure it. That's one good one. Over here, you could come on the bike and see how long does it take you to do 2,000 meters. Those would be two good ones to look at. Then in terms of gymnastics, you know, how many, can you do air squats to depth? That's probably the first one. It's like, is your air squat here or is it here? Or can you go all the way to below parallel and then up? And then once you can do that, how long does it take you to do 5? How long does it take you to do 10? Once you can do 30 air squats, then you can see how fast you can do it. So these are different ways to measure components of gymnastics training. Can you do a push-up? If not, where are you on your push-up progression? Can you do it on a 25-inch box, 20-inch box, 16-inch box? You know, these are different ways to measure that progress. And then, yeah, definitely with the strength training, that's usually the easiest to kind of measure and track. So we just pick the movements, like strict press today, for example. So instead of what we did today, which was pick a weight that was moderate and then do 6 reps on each side for 5 rounds, what we would have you do is start with a 10-pound, then maybe wait a minute and see, could you do at least 1 rep with 15 pounds? Okay, if you can, let's wait 2 or 3 minutes and see if you could do 20 pounds. Then that we've kind of established a baseline there. And then 6 months later, we can see, has it improved at all? So those are all the kinds of things, and it keeps fitness interesting. No, I mean, because that's why I think it's important to, I wouldn't say inferior is the right word, but I think it's important to recognize what you can work on. And you know what I always say to myself is, okay, wherever I am, that's where I am today. It's also the same thing I tell my patients about stepping on the scale. You don't need to be afraid of the scale, because the scale is just measuring what is the weight of your body against the Earth's gravity. It is what it is, right? So get on the scale, see the number, and then take that information and see if you want to do anything with it. I think it's the same thing with baselines. And if you don't know your baseline, you can never improve your baseline. If you never do a strict press, you're never going to get better at strict press. So I think if you come with that mindset, like that's why one of our core values is the growth mindset. So I think as we get older, a lot of times we like to become the thing. In other aspects of life, like for example, I mean, you can take me and Eddie. Eddie's very comfortable with fitness. If you put him in the gym and ask him to do a 375-pound deadlift, he's like in his element, right? But then if I come in here and ask him to take a medication history, when he first started, that was uncomfortable. It was something new, something different. He didn't know medication names, right? So for him, coming here and taking a medical history is something totally different and new. For me, going into the gym and doing deadlifts is something totally different and new. So I think now where I am 7 and 8 years later, it's completely different when I was 7 or 8 years ago. But if I didn't start 7 years ago, I would still be completely uncomfortable. What were you going to say? Yeah.
Let's say we're talking about benchmarking, and I can't do a movement. Say my air squat is a quarter.
Yeah.
But you're telling me I need to be able to go all the way down and all the way up. Can you talk a little bit about how to use benchmarking to go from a beginning movement to the full movement, so that I would say I would feel discouraged if you told me that I have to do a full air squat to count it as a benchmark. So how do you create benchmarks when you can't do the full movement?
Yeah. So actually, you might have missed it, but I even mentioned about the squat specifically. The first standard will be squat to depth. Can you squat to depth or not? So if you can only do a quarter squat, you can only do a quarter squat. So then we're going to work from a quarter squat to a half squat. And then we're going to work from a half squat to a 3/4 squat. And then we're going to work to a full depth squat. So I think, like, again, it's important for the coaches to be aware of that. And they definitely, our coaches would not be making anyone feel bad if they cannot squat to depth during the assessment, or whatever is the movement, because we have to figure out where the patient is or the athlete, and then start from there in terms of setting their next goal. I think push-ups are another good example. Many of our athletes, including myself, cannot do like a standard push-up. So you can start with a box push-up. So, of course, the first standard would be a wall push-up. Then you can go to a high box like 30 inches, then 24 inches, and 20 inches, until you're comfortable getting all the way to the ground. So that's another good example of how you don't have to be at the full depth or the full range of motion in order to use benchmarking. Any other questions? This is great.
Consistency.
Yes, definitely for improving and making progress on your benchmarks. Consistency can be super important. Great. Well, I think we can wrap it up. Thanks, everyone. Let's get one picture. Actually, stay there for 1 second, Dr. K. We take a couple pictures. Yeah, look at me. I'm talking. We have to pretend we're still in the seminar. Did you get a couple? Yeah, you got one. Okay. All right. Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.
I consider myself always like a person.
Oh, we'll put it away. You can leave it here.
The exercise, but you don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Don't you? I think every doctor should learn this. No.